Hello there, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. This is Watches Tonight. This evening, we talk about display casebacks that shouldn't be, 2019, the year of the uncool watch, and counterintuitive messages for watch collectors. All of that and your viewer wrist shots right here on Watches Tonight. Remember, think of the people who keep me chock-a-block with watches, thewatchbox.com, the best place to buy, trade, or sell your watch with over 3,000 pre-owned and vintage watches live right now. I prefer the indies. You might like Rolex. You can have them both. Open a different window and keep me streaming. And remember, we will not be here next Monday. We have a U.S. federal holiday. No one's going to be here at the Watchbox, but I will be conducting a live chat, and this is completely unscripted and anything goes on Talking Time with Tim Mosso, which is my Facebook group. We've got over 4,200 members, and I'm pushing for 5,000 before the end of the year. So join me. We're going to do 2 live chats rather than our usual one next week on that channel, because this show will not be here next Monday. All right, viewer wrist shots number 1. Marcus hits the road in Germany with his Cartier Santos Black DLC. George Y and his Watchbox bought AP Royal Oak 15450, rock the watches and wheels. Thank you for trusting our company, George. Conrad and his AP Royal Oak Jumbo partake of the Maryland summer tradition of crab dining. That is awfully appetizing and looks slightly dangerous, to be honest. And then Anthony and his Watchbox bought Grand Seiko SBGV 238 are hard at work on science in his lab. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your wrist on my list. Let's see who's in the box right now. Edward Ledden of Sweden, Matt Foster, Sean B. from Temple, Texas, Enrique C. Hello, Enrique. We've got Watching Watches, your wrist shots in the show tonight. Butik 1 from Poland, and he's vacationing in southern Italy. John N. in the box, Mateo C., Ron from Louisville, Joe Tyson from Apex, North Carolina. By the way, Joe says hi to Tim and Sean. Sean, you got an acknowledgement. We got Terry C., Adi Myers from Yorkshire, UK, Benjamin B. Benjamin, you might be in the show too. Mason 1, Bobby Legs, Alex O., Richard Combs from South Florida, Christopher H., Nathan Silva, Dave Opencar, and Ignacio with Ethan Davis and Jeffrey D. Guys, welcome to the show. Let's talk about display casebacks that shouldn't exist, because this is a very 2021 phenomenon. It's been building quietly for a few years, and a few years back when we were Watch You Want and I had that different set down in South Florida made of stuff I bought at IKEA, I mentioned that I thought that some display casebacks felt like a cynical pander, as though a watch brand was giving you dog meat and expecting you to thank them for steak. Like, I thought that this was wrong. Like, I would rather have an attractive, solid caseback than be forced to look at a movement that is entirely machine-made, machine-finished, and unremarkable. Again, it's just like telling the client, I'm going to give you something ugly and expect you to treat it like it's a great work of art. I just didn't like the spirit of the idea. But I was called snobbish, and I thought at the time, maybe I am getting a little bit self-aware, and maybe this is snobbery. Maybe folks want to see the movement no matter how ugly. But it seems like in the last 5 years, there's been a change of heart in the watch community, and more folks are beginning to think that we don't need all of these display casebacks. And as example A, let's consider some recent offenders, because there have been a bunch of them this year, starting with the Tudor Black Bay 58 AG925. To be fair, there have been a couple of displayback Tudors launched this year in the Black Bay product line, and folks are asking whether we really need to see the caliber MT5400. Now, I'm going to say this, the Black Bay AG925 is one of the best new watches of the year. Hands down, one of the most attractive, imaginative, and it sort of backs Tudor out of the trap it set for itself by becoming over-dependent on the Black Bay. This really does feel like a new watch with its taupe dial, ceramic bezel insert to match, and that lovely precious metal case using a material we haven't seen commonly since the pocket watch days. So I really like this watch, and I love the Black Bay 58 case size. I just think that the caliber MT5400 wasn't meant to be seen, and it shows, pun intended. Now, Breitling Premier B09 pistachio dial. I think of all the new watches this year, this is the one, at this point, I feel that I would most love to own and buy with my own money. And Goffberg, the other side of the company, is a Breitling dealer, so that might actually happen. But this watch has everything going for it. No date dial, pistachio tone that manages to be 2021 green, but a different kind of green, not the kind that everyone else is using. 40 millimeters, nice and thin, manual wind. It feels like a handsome vintage homage without being a slavish re-edition. It's not emulating anything except the spirit of an age, and I love that. But here's the rule of thumb with ugly movements. The worst of them tend to be automatic to manual conversions, and caliber B09 is as ugly as the dial is gorgeous. And this is the problem with converting an automatic system. You still have the mounting points for the winding bridge and the rotor, as well as the reduction gears, and it's very, very, very difficult to remove those scars. So whereas the B01 is actually one of the better looking automatic chronograph calibers, here I feel like an attractive vintage-inspired caseback would have been more appealing. Or if they just showed enough of the movement to give you a glimpse of the column wheel and the balance, rather than showing you the huge expanse on which the winding bridge and mechanism for reduction used to sit. It just doesn't work. Everything else about the watch I love. Now, Oris finally makes a display caseback worthy caliber 400, and caliber 400 is a good-looking, properly sized movement for the watch it's in. In its class, it's a value leader in performance, and it looks pretty good with its double barrel architecture and a large open Edelchron adjusted balance. So I'll say I like that on the newest versions of the Aquis 8, but the still available previous Aquis, which is a good looking watch from the front, and its raw Sellita SW200 would have been well served here by a solid caseback. That is about as raw as it gets. If you've ever heard T-Model Ford's version of the blues, extremely raw. This is basically that, and it's given me the blues. I don't think we need to see that, and I think we can all agree that an SW200 in any form does not deserve the appellation high mech, so the rotor lies. A solid caseback would have been better there. Again, the caliber 400 fixes this, which is why I'm glad to see the new Oris movement on the job. I'll also say that Jaeger-LeCoultre back in 2018 probably did something they shouldn't have. The relaunch of the Polaris, not as one watch, but as a full model line, included display casebacks on a whole host of watches, like the 899 and the caliber 750 family. All these movements basically too small for large sports watches, and at the very least, too small for display casebacks in large sports watches. So there was the caliber 751, previously never used on a display caseback JLC. It had been used on display caseback Cartier watches, but it just doesn't look right. First, because it's designed as a drop-in replacement for the Rolex Piguet 1185, which is a 25.6 millimeter movement, and this movement is that size. The problem here is that the case is 42 millimeters. Spacer rings much? You better believe it. It's a technically proficient movement. Vertical clutch, column wheel, free sprung, ceramic bearings, twin barrels, 65-hour power reserve, and able to keep very good time. But it does not deserve a display caseback, especially not in a watch that big with a tungsten rotor. I thought that was a solid miss. I will also say this. It makes you pine for the good old days when manufacturers had the good sense to hide truly ugly movements like the Panerai caliber OP29. Thank you, SJX, for the picture. This is the infamous, unfinished Unitas ETA 6498, or I guess 6497, that came in the 2009 limited edition PAM 318. Remember the lambasted PAM 318, the Brooklyn Bridge? Well, we have an expression in the United States to sell someone the Brooklyn Bridge, and it means essentially to fool someone in a very cynical and ill-mannered fashion, especially where sales are concerned. So this watch at least had an attractive caseback, and in case you're wondering what Panerai wound up doing with the movement, shortly after people discovered what was in the watch, they offered to swap out the movements for a COSC certified and finished 6497 free of charge. But my point is, here at least they knew what they were doing, and they put a solid caseback over that movement. That's quite honestly how it should be with a lot of modern day movements in modern day watches that represent good value and solid engineering, but they're just not pretty. Let's see what you guys are saying right here. Okay, I'm going to do my best to do justice to your comments. Terry C. joining in from Toronto, and Jumbo Jet Pilot getting up early in Shanghai with me. Plus Jeffrey D. from Western Massachusetts. Okay, let's see what you guys are saying. Chris L. making us alive for once. He too is in Singapore, which I appreciate. Alex O. saying, I'm torn on display casebacks for workman-like movements, but definitely if it's a precious metal case, give me solid for more material I'm playing for. And that's a fact. For example, on the new yellow gold Black Bay 58, you're sacrificing about 1 ounce of gold, which is well over $1,000 worth of value, and you're getting roughly 30 Swiss franc sapphire crystal. So you are losing quite a bit of gold. Now that might be a cost control mechanism to keep the price of the watch down, but I prefer the way Patek used to do this, where they'd give you the solid gold case back and the display case back, so you could choose without feeling like you were getting cheated either way. That was integrity, probably not possible at a Tudor price point. What else is going on right here? We also have Edward Ledden shouting out the Tim Mosso Facebook group, Talking Time with Tim Mosso, saying that McLaren pick in the Facebook group was my post, but I took the picture from Google. That's okay, we borrow quite a bit on the Facebook group. We do Wednesday Wheels every Wednesday morning, topics in car collecting, and we always share images we like. Jeff saying ETA is a great movement for cheap service. So do you think we should see it? What's your position on that, Jeff? I'd like to know. Then right here we have Benjamin B saying, unless the movement is beautiful to look at, I'll take a thinner overall profile over a sapphire caseback. And that's right, sapphire casebacks in general add at minimum 1 millimeter to the thickness of a watch. So there is a price to be paid there. And then Sean B saying, man, the Premier B09s are pretty. I have to agree with you. I love that watch. But counterpoint, Marco is saying, terrible green looks feminine. That's okay. I love pistachio, the color, the nut, the ice cream, and now the watch. So at least I'm being consistent there. What else is going? Hans is saying, I'm with you on that, Marco. He's not a fan of that green. The Spruce Moose, a fan of the Spruce Goose, saying, couldn't agree more about the AG925, but the Black Bay black ceramic movement looks great to me in matching black. That's true. They did change it a little bit to make it more appropriate for that particular display caseback. By the way, are you using that handle, the Spruce Moose, in reference to like a Tailspin episode from 25 years ago? Because if you are, I'm impressed that you remember that. What else is going on? Jean-Claude Beaver in the box, and Mez9 joining in along with Jean H. Welcome, guys. What else do we have? Marco saying, weekly reminder, we need to see a Rolex on Tim's wrist. The Z Blue thing is going to happen. Rest assured, the Z Blue thing is going to happen. I promise you. But being Tim, I might do something crazy. Like I might buy a Rolex pocket watch before I buy a Rolex wristwatch. And then right here, Time Display is saying, I used to think I had to have a display back. Now it is not that important to me. And Marco saying the Polaris Chrono is nice, but honestly a bit underwhelming in person, just not as good as Rolex. I'm going to say some of those Polaris models are nice. Some of them, they leave me cold. Again, there is some diversity in the model line, just like there are many Rolex models. Some I like and some I don't. Wrist shots, number 2. John S. and his 2-line, no date, Rolex Submariner, ready to roll. This one apparently from 1995. I love the watches and wheel shot. You got to tell me what the car is, guys. You got to tell me that too. Sean B. in the Breitling Avenger GMT, rev it up with IMSA at the 6 hours at the Glen. Watkins Glen, the ancestral home of the other side of my family, the Lanes. They're all up there watching the Grand Prix. My cousin works in wines, if you're ever in the area. Abdul R. and his Seiko Alpinist went foraging for mushrooms in Germany's Black Forest, and he actually sent me a photo. He found quite a few of them. Truffles, I believe, not the magic variety. Matthias and his vintage Zodiac Seawolf style on a modern NATO strap, and my grandpa actually left me that watch in non-functional condition when he died, and I'm going to get it running and I'm going to put it back together and bring it on the show. That will be my first self-serviced and regulated automatic watch. I'm working through it now. Okay, 2019, the year of the uncool watch. I'll be heading to Dubai Week later this fall, Dubai Watch Week. They do it once every 2 years, so we missed the big one in 2020, and everything is on schedule as of now. But it's striking to remember that 2019 was the last time we had a truly normal model year built around the 2 big trade shows at SIHH and Baselworld, plus the regional shows Watch Time LA and New York, plus Dubai Watch Week. And the old way went out with a bang, or more precisely, a backfire. Seriously, I can't remember the last time a single model year delivered so many broadly controversial watches, and in 2019 we had a bumper crop. So let's look back at some of the most explosively polarizing watches of 2019. Given the mixed response, fast forwarding to the present for a moment, to the relatively compact and discreet 36mm 2021 Rolex Explorer two-tone, you can imagine how the world received Rolex's mammoth 43mm 2019 Sea-Dweller two-tone. This thing was and remains a monster. Everyone was asking the same question: who is this for? who was the target market for this watch? Who was saying we needed a giant two-tone Rolex diver? And when you work through all the likely suspects, you don't really find one, because the watch is too big for the most part for Asian markets. They generally don't like 43mm watches, especially super case 43mm watches. It was too brash for the West. This kind of look hasn't been in fashion in Western Europe or the United States in a long time. Now you might say perhaps the Middle Eastern market, and that's possible. That certainly has the spirit of the kind of watch that's possible in the Middle East and popular in the Middle East, but the sheer amount of gold makes it an unlikely match for Islamic cultures. So what's left? Given the sanctions against Russia, it doesn't seem like they were the likely target for this watch. And while Latin America is a lucrative market for high-end watches, I'm not sure by itself it could have propelled this model into being. So I don't know ultimately who the target customer was for this watch, but I will say this: with a retail of $16,600 against $11,700 for the standard steel Sea-Dweller 43, it was a lot for folks to essentially swallow and accept. It was a big price delta to get your watch two-toned. And even worse, Rolex deleted the flip-lock dive extension. Now, if you pop open Sea-Dwellers, you'll find that they have a flip-lock system, and then they have a glide lock system. And the Sea-Dweller 43 in steel has both. But the Sea-Dweller 43 in two-tone only has glide lock, like a Submariner. So its capability, at the extreme, granted, for that 99th percentile guy, has been degraded. But here's the thing about this and every other watch I'm going to discuss. In the hand, in person, it redeems itself. Most watches that leave me feeling kind of cold and cynical ultimately ingratiate themselves once I get a chance to see them, because most watches today are pretty good. There aren't a whole lot of bad watches. And I might have to do a whole episode someday about watches that work the other way, where I have a better impression of them until I hold them in the hand. And I have to say that that is a distinct minority. There are very few watches that are worse in person than in photos. This watch didn't show well in photos, and I still don't know whether it was just a cadre of two-tone super fans at Rolex that made this happen, but it was an unexpected and slightly disturbing launch back in 2019, because nobody got this model. Okay, the AP code 1159, if you were going to pick just one controversial watch from 2019, it would be this one. I have to say that you thought the Rolex was controversial? This thing could be a case study in blown marketing, because the watches themselves actually look great when you see them, and only the automatic and the chronograph actually looked cheap in the press photos. The problem is the automatic and the chronograph were the volume models that were going to make or break this line. The successor to the Jules Audemars, it was effectively a replacement for 20 years of failed AP dress watch design. So where did that leave AP right after SIHH? Well, here's the thing. Complications like the Sonnery, the Tourbillon, and the Perpetual Calendar looked fantastic. But they were making so few of them out of the gate, they couldn't salvage the reputation or the initial impressions. And you only get one opportunity to make a first impression. I should also say the case architecture was gorgeous and three-dimensional, prismatic and nuanced from the very beginning. That's one of the 2020 versions of the watch right there. But you get a better sense of how open and airy and thoughtful the case design is. AP fixed the insipid dials within a year. They added a gradient that was first pioneered on the Bolshoi enamel dial model in 2019. That one proved that the code 1159 could be pretty, and they came back and they did the same thing with a gradient in lacquer the next year on the autos and the chronos, but the damage was done. Plus, prices were too high to survive a botched launch. Remember, $30,200 for the automatic and $47,600 for the chrono, and only in rose or white gold. You did not have the option of tantalum, titanium, or steel, which probably would have swayed a few people by itself if it had launched with the watch as an option back in 2019. Let's see what's going on right here. Okay, a lot of friends and fans in the box. We've got Volper from Germany. We've got Simon K saying, "Whoa, that purple." Burning Mr. B shouting out greetings from the Netherlands. And we've got Mark S. We've got Christopher H. Alex O. saying, "It isn't a problem that they made a watch that doesn't photograph well," or "Isn't it a problem that they made a watch that doesn't photograph well? That's also how we look at watches at a glance. Doesn't it call into question AP design capability?" I would say yes, a little of that, but also the fact that they didn't spend more time trying to figure out how to get these to photograph well. Like, You can't change the design of the watch after that's frozen, but you can absolutely do things in the studio that make the dials look as expensive as they were, and they were expensive. Lacquered, multiple applications, hand polishing, rose gold, white gold indices, hands and numerals. Good dials, just flat and colorless, given how they were photographed. Time Hill saying the 1159 suffered from hype and expectations before its launch. In other words, it would have been difficult for it to meet those expectations. People wanted something big to follow the Jules Audemars, and this was not it. Mark S. saying, Tim, at Holland Cycle's price point, they should have fully integrated wiring so you don't see any wires. Very off topic, but I do own a Bill Holland bike. I love Bill Holland bikes. I'm going to buy his new carbon bike once the new Dura Ace Di2 comes out next year. It's probably going to be next year for non-OEM builds. I'm going to get a new Holland bike. But he is right. They are expensive, but then again, they are entirely handmade in the US, and they are making all of the parts, including forks locally, and they're actually making their own carbon lugs, and they're full custom, so you're going to get the right angles, the gauge of carbon, the paint. It's a very bespoke process, and at the end of the day, you can spend the same amount of money on a Trek or a Cannondale or a Specialized and get absolutely nothing custom. So I think that Bill Holland bikes are expensive, but ultimately worth it. And then Abdul R saying, I think they should make it more Royal Oak looking if they want it to sell out. The funny thing is they did put a lot of Royal Oak in the Code 1159. If you look at the case design and you look at the screws that are used to fix the bars that hold the strap, tons of Royal Oak references there. Okay, Ian Chan joining in from Singapore. Edward Ledden saying, I would love to buy a bike from Bill Holland. Definitely check out Holland Cycles online. Open a different window, keep me streaming. All right, the Tudor Black Bay P01 dive watch. Rolex had teased a vintage diver revival prior to Basel World that year. And that's exactly what the brand delivered. As you can see, this watch was a revival of a historic prototype from 1967. The problem is people hated it, and it wasn't what they wanted. It was offbeat, daring, and different. It was very large, but also not another safe play Black Bay that was a variation on the same watch that came out in 2012. This looked nothing like the other Black Bays, hands excluded. It was a very daring attempt, and it ultimately became a niche watch because it was too aggressive to play to a wide audience. It wasn't this, because this is what people wanted and thought they were getting that year. A literal Tudor Submariner reissue. Now, this wouldn't make sense because that's what the Black Bay is. It's an homage to the Tudor and Rolex subs from the 50s and early 60s. So it wouldn't have made sense to also add a Tudor sub to the collection. Still, when people expected this and they got the P01, there was a remarkable backlash for once against a Tudor dive watch. People generally eat this stuff up. And I have to say, that's the reason this is one of my favorite Tudor watches, right up there with the Heritage Advisor, because Tudor did take a chance. And frankly, I think this is going to be a cool watch to own down the road 10, 15 years from now when people realize just how few of them are floating around. All right. See what's going on right here. Mick in Florida saying, not the watch I think of when considering the AP, speaking of the Code 1159. And then right here, we've got Abdul saying, that Tudor was an experiment that went wrong. Tudor's been making a lot of experiments lately, and they continue to refine their designs. It's true, they've been experimenting with yellow gold, with sterling silver, with top dials, with ceramic. They do experiment within the scope of what works. Like, I don't think you're ever going to see a ceramic version of the Royale Day-Date or a ceramic version of the Heritage Advisor. But among Black Bay variations, you've got your Chronos, your GMTs, ceramic, gold, silver. You've got a titanium diver in the Pelagos. Tudor will experiment, but there is a limit to what they will experiment with. And then we have Hans N asking, are you smoking those funny cigarettes again, Timothy? No, I'm crazy without help. I need no mind-altering drugs. And then Edward Ledden saying, Zinn can experiment all they want and people will still love everything they release. I really loved that burnished dial they launched this year. That was awesome. All right, jumping into your viewer wrist shots number 3. Watching watches. Dude, I promised you would be on the show, and here you are with your Zinn 756 Diapol overlooking Frankfurt, the home of Zinn. Very nice, guys. Jonathan S. enjoys East Coast Beach in Singapore with his Rolex GMT Master 2 black bezel, looking good. Mehmed E. from Hamburg shares his new Omega Speed Master Professional Moonwatch, which looks great. Impressive collection, by the way, Mehmet. And then Mikhail of Poland starts his pre-flight prep with his Omega Speedmaster Apollo 8. Guys, send your wrist chats to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your analog on my digital. Let's jump into the box here, see what you guys are saying right there. All right. We got Tim Schubart asking Tudor Black Bay or Breitling Super Ocean. That's a tough call because there's so many Breitlings and there are so many Tudors in those classes. I would say if I were going with a Super Ocean, it would be the Super Ocean Heritage 57 Charity Edition, the CARES Edition, I think it was. The rainbow dial with the blue bezel and the blue dial. That was a limited release for 2020. And if I were going with a Tudor Black Bay, it would almost certainly be the P01 or the AG925. And really, it's not close. It would be those two or nothing else, because those are far and away the most interesting Black Bays offered. Unless you're talking about the old Black Bay Black with the ETA movement, the watch they made for a couple of months between 2015 and 2016, that on a collector's basis might be the watch I choose. All right, 2019, year of the uncool watch continued. Chopard Alpine Eagle. Few words stirred more controversy back in 2019, and everyone jumped on this watch, which was admittedly a bandwagon piece, because 2021 might be peak Nautilus 5711 due to the new green dial and the end of the model line, but 2019 was the peak of the integrated bracelet steel sports watch Genta-esque bandwagon. And that year, the Alpine Eagle was infamous as the archetype of the cash-in Gerald Genta knockoff design. But to be perfectly honest, I think those of us in the watch media and social media judged this watch in haste. I have had a real softening of my original criticisms and prejudice towards this watch, and I think more of us in the watch media have had a chance to handle it, and we think a little bit more highly of it. The case finishing is beautiful. I have to say the dial color and the texture, whether you go for blue or gray, are absolutely world class, and I would happily put them on par with the best you'll see from the likes of Lange or Audemars Piguet in this segment. They look a lot more expensive than the dial on a 5711, and more imaginative too. The eye of the eagle, maybe in the eye of the beholder, but it looks good. Let's take a look at the movement. This is not a super handsome movement, but it's properly sized for the case. It's reasonably well finished, mostly by machine, and as a chronometer with a 60-hour power reserve built in-house, it is technically proficient enough that it belongs in a watch at this price point, and the Alpine Eagle case and bracelet finish are so good that I honestly think it feels like you're getting a $25,000 watch when you pay the retail price of $12,800 for this watch, which is incredibly fair, given that it costs $34,890 for a 5711 in steel, $21,600 for an H. Moser & C Streamliner Center Second, and $20,000 for a Chapek Antarctique. This watch is as impressive as all of those, and frankly, with the exception of the hand finishing on the Patek movement, I would even say it might be even a little bit superior. So while yes, it's a copy of the St. Moritz, which was Chopard's integrated bracelet watch the early 80s. That, in turn, was a copy of watches like the 222, the Jumbo Ingenieur, the Royal Oak, and the Nautilus. But at the end of the day, when you hold it in your hand and you wear it on your wrist, it looks expensive, it feels expensive, and honestly, it gives you the impression of a watch twice its price. So this was a controversial watch at the time because, like a lot of watches that year, it didn't photograph well. You need to see it in person. And if the rehabilitation of the Alpine Eagle is now underway, consider the revisionist view of the Lange Odysseus. No more in-store inventory. There was a period when demand for this had slackened, and the consensus for about 15 minutes was that the watch was awkward. There was a poor match between the width of the bracelet and the width of the case. And a lot of folks said, well, you know what, it's an awkward attempt to graft a full integrated Genta-style bracelet onto a round Lange-style dress watch case, and it does give you that impression. The Odysseus, however, looks a whole lot better on a strap. And in 2020, they came out with a white gold version that you can get on a strap, either leather or rubber, and it looks the business. We now need to get the steel version of this watch on a strap, because you find the more you look at the watch on the strap and the more you look at it from different angles, the better it actually looks. This is another one of those watches that photographs terribly, and no sooner had we gotten used to the idea that this was something of a failed launch than demand took off, it became a waitlisted watch, and never again, at least to this day, would an example be found unsold in a case at a Lange dealer. That again lasted a figurative 15 minutes. This is a really cool watch, whether you go with the gray dial or the blue dial, which, like the Chopard, is rich in quality, both of design and of materials. Plus you get the date-o-matic movement, which endows this watch with both uncommon beauty internally and an uncommon complication in this product segment. It looks really good. You don't get that level of finish on an AP 15500. Heck, you don't get that level of finish on the Jumbo. That's how good this is. You better believe it's worth the money they're asking. And what money are they asking? Just under $30,000. 120 meters water resistant, you can have your cake and eat it too. It is a full swimmable, full service sports watch, and I would even go so far as to say one of the best you can buy right now in stainless steel. Is it the handsomest thing ever? No, not from every angle, but I think we can say that about a lot of cars historically that ultimately wound up being great successes. They have their best angles and you need to appreciate them that way, and that's definitely the case with the Odysseus. All right, let's see what you guys are saying right here. Simon Templar saying that Royal Oaks will ingratiate you with the ladies. I can't quote him literally. We have Quarter's Eye saying finishing on the Odysseus is stunning. Sean Hansen, have not seen Odysseus in person, hoping for the best when I do. I finally encountered one and I shot a review on Watchbox Reviews, so you're definitely going to want to check that out because I go in depth, I rotate the watch, and I show you macros of the case back. And you need to see this watch from 360 degrees, the way a watch should be experienced, to make an opinion. Let's see what else is going on. Baltimore Spirits Co., our friend in the box, saying the Lange reminds me a lot of the Breguet 5517. Interesting comparison, especially with the lug profiles where they join the bracelet. We've got Davey85 saying Lange has the best looking traditionally finished movements in the industry. And then right here we have Marco saying Overseas and Aquanaut are most contemporary looking and best high horology steel sports watches. Terry C, not convinced, saying the Odysseus has a great personality, but she's so much fun. Okay, what else is going on? Tim Schubert, which places would you like to visit if you travel to Germany? Well, I'd have to take my Zinn home to Frankfurt. Berlin is suddenly young and hip, so I'd have to check that out. And then I'd have to make a pilgrimage to the home of Mercedes-Benz and Porsche down in Stuttgart. I'd also like to experience Bavaria and actually experience like the old Germany in the countryside, not just like hip modern cities, but like the old Germany. Like from when there was the idea of like the small Germany of principalities and duchies before unification. I'd like to experience that too. All right. And if you live in any of those places, I'll be traveling again later this year. So let's talk about viewer wrist shots number 4. Ben B. I promised you, dude, you're in the show tonight. And Atticus the dog shares space with the scenery and the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter black ceramic. We've got Jimmy Y and his Rolex Batman discovering a dent in the US Open Championship Cup. See, it's not just watches. Scratches and swirls and dents happen on championship cups too. Adrian B and his vintage Alfa Romeo join forces with the H. Moser & C Heritage Center Second Funky Blue, looking good right there. We've got Coleman of Sydney, Australia, taking us home and taking delivery of his new Patek Philippe Aquanaut travel time, signing up the paperwork at Patek Philippe. Congratulations, Coleman. Wear it in good health. Let's see what's going on in the box right now. We have Dr. TikTok saying, I went to Triberg and I was able to get away from the tourists. And then Christopher H saying the Odysseus is a hottie, just some minor plastic surgery away from perfection. And I would say that surgery, in this case, is the strap. Again, I want the steel watch on the rubber strap. That is the perfect Odysseus. I would also like to see a salmon dial. I think that would be cool. Against the grain, counterintuitive factors in watch collecting. We need to talk about this because there is a whole lot of stuff that folks will find counterintuitive but also fun to discover. Starting with Patek Philippe. I had a client call up and ask, why is it, Tim, that a Patek Philippe annual calendar costs so much less than a chronograph? $53,000 for the annual calendar you see here, and then $78,000 for the 5172G chronograph. So you're talking an annual calendar and a moon phase, right, versus a chronograph, and an automatic winding annual calendar versus a chronograph that is a manual. So how is it the chronograph costs so much more money? And how is it that the chronograph is $10,000 more expensive than the also white gold flyback chronograph, power reserve, annual calendar, automatic winding 5960? How is this watch $10,000 less expensive than the manual wind chronograph? And the answer is, at Patek Philippe, standard lateral clutch chronographs are considered to be on a higher tier of complexity than vertical clutch chronographs and annual calendars. Because you can create an annual calendar complication on a base automatic movement using somewhere between 7 and 12 pieces, and it's all wheel-based. So it's very simple, and you can just build it up like Legos. There's no fine-tuning there. Whereas with a lateral clutch chronograph, like a perpetual calendar, there is some regulation and tuning to be done of the mechanism. Properly tensioning and adjusting a lateral clutch, plus the levers and horns that actuate a column wheel, not easy to do, but specifically it's the tuning of the lateral clutch and the engagement of that system that accounts partially for the expense here, but also the fact that at Patek Philippe, watchmakers who work on vertical clutches, which are more modern and more efficient, they are lower level, lower certification watchmakers than the people who work on the lateral clutches. So it takes quite a bit more experience and certification inside Patek Philippe to work on that 5172 or 5170. And that is how Patek views it internally. That largely explains things like the cost, and also why it takes longer to get that type of watch back from service. As with an annual calendar, which can be built up from parts with minimal regulation, a vertical clutch system can be built up, whereas the lateral clutch always has to be tuned very carefully, and then it has to be run at length and worn in. So that's the answer right there. I would also say if you look at the 5172's chrono movement, you could see there is an awful lot of fine-tuning to do between the yoke, the levers, the horns, the column wheels, the springs, and the minute jumper. Very, very complicated and not for beginners. Also, people think Rolex watches are common, but Rolex watches are in fact scarce. Scarcity is a function of demand, not of production. It's the ratio between the two, and Rolex gets it right. So why are your rare boutique brand watches not worth a fortune? True story. Back in the Watch You Want days, a guy came in and he saw what we were asking for Daytonas, steel Daytonas. And he demanded to get no less than retail price for his used Glasuta Original Panamatic Reserve, because he said it is a Glasuit, or no, he said it's a Glashute, and it's a power reserve. They only make 10,000 watches a year. Rolex makes 1 million. Well, Rolex makes somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million. That's true. And it's true that Glashute makes about 10,000. The problem is that 10,000 is a little bit more than the market can bear, which means there's a surplus of watches, even from this relatively low volume brand, even with the power reserve, even from a low volume model line, which means when we buy that watch, we have to buy it for less than retail and sell it for less than retail. That was in the Watch You Want days. The guy wouldn't have it. In the end, he wouldn't take anything less than full retail for his Glashute. So, you know, we always try to be polite when we have to decline to meet someone's price, but at the end of the day, Rolex scarcity is a real thing in spite of Rolex production numbers. They're completely divorced from each other, and while I would rather own that personally, at the end of the day, the market wouldn't, and that's why Rolex scarcity, at least for core model lines, is a real thing in spite of the fact they're numerous. Why in-house movements are overrated. Think about this. You have a 1966 Shelby 427 Cobra, or at least it would be a 427 Cobra, but a guy is trying to sell it to you with a modern day fuel-injected Ford Camry crate engine. And he's telling you that it's more efficient, it's faster, it's more reliable, and lower maintenance. And your answer is, I know, but I want the one that's supposed to be there. And the one that's supposed to be there is an all-aluminum side oiler, you know, dry sump 427 from the 1960s. You want the race engine from back in the day with all of its flaws. And that's why no one would ever want a Royal Oak Jumbo with anything but the JLC-based caliber 2121 inside. Did AP invent this movement? No, but it's beautifully crafted, handmade, and one of the few modern AP movements that is still decorated by hand. It was also born with the jumbo back in 1972, which means it belongs in the jumbo in 2021, except no substitutes. No one wants an in-house caliber here. Or consider the IWC Grand Complication, one of my all-time favorite watches. 42 millimeters, platinum, aventurine moon phase, perpetual calendar, chronograph, minute repeater, automatic winding, all of that, and yes, caliber 79091 with 75 jewels is built on a Valjoux 7750, but it is so heavily modified that, believe me, if I had to tell you whether this is an original act or a Valjoux caliber, I would say that it is at least 66% IWC. Remember, a standard Valjoux 7750 has 25 jewels, this has 75 and over 500 parts. It has a movement repeater on the top. It is modular. It has a repeater from Audemars Piguet Renault Papy back when they were just Renault Papy. It has the Kurt Klaus perpetual calendar system in it. Do I want an in-house caliber that's more original but less capable? Hell no. Give me the full deal 79091. Valjoux based, yes, but improved in a way that no standard 7750 ever is. I don't want an in-house caliber here. I am quite satisfied. All of which is to say, you do not need a manufacturer movement to have a special watch. And recall that for the first 250 years of its history, Vacheron Constantin did not make movements. They were an établisseur. They would order a dial, a case, and a movement to their spec, and then assemble them, finish them, and adjust them beautifully in Geneva. But they were not a movement manufacturer. Were they Holy Trinity? You better believe it, and a great one. You do not need an in-house caliber to have a great watch, or even to have a great movement. Finally, I want to emphasize that a couple of things pop out, like we specialize in early and special FP Journe watches here at the Watchbox. It's something that's been our specialty since like forever. But here's the deal. There are some people who struggle with the logic behind the vintage Journes. The big thing is always the question, why is a brass movement worth more than gold? That's a brass caliber. That was the original tourbillon remontoir that was made from 1999 to 2004, mid-2004. That was the original Journe tourbillon. So here's the deal. It's not that brass is worth more than rose gold, it's that there are fewer of the brass movement watches. Not only were they only made from 99 to mid-2004 in the standard series, the ruthenium watches were built a little bit longer than that, but those years, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 3, 4, those were years when Journe was making fewer watches per year than the roughly 900 to 950 the factory makes today. So they are limited by scarcity. They're desirable because they're early and important, they're pioneering watches, but also because there are very few of them out there. So rose gold movements are spectacular, there's no doubt, but their current production, and they have been for almost 2 decades, and they're still making them, so there is no shortage. Scarcity, as ever, begets value in the watch market. I would also say this, I have a lot of questions about dive watches, such as how is it my 300-meter dive watch can pass a water test and then I drowned it on vacation in a pool? And the reason for that is that a good watchmaker would perform both a high-pressure test and a low-pressure test. A bad watchmaker, or maybe even you if you've got a water tester at home, is just going to dial it up to 300 meters and see if the thing fails, and if it doesn't, you let it rip. The problem is, a dive watch is a lot like a sandwich. It's a sandwich of crystals and steel rings and case seals and lubricants. And all of those things are compressed, improving their hermeticity under high pressure. A low-pressure test, which is what a good watchmaker will do, will also establish whether or not water can get into and out of the watch at low pressures, like you might experience in 1 to 3 feet of water splashing around in the pool. So that's how your 300-meter dive watch managed to drown in spite of passing a full ISO 6425 125% water test. See what else is going on here. Christopher H. saying, great closing monologue, Tim. Is that a hint? Got you right there. And then right here, we've got Designer Drip, greetings and peace from England. Thanks for staying up late with me. Thomas Burnett. Mark from New Jersey. We've got Kevin K. saying he wants a 1993 birth year watch that isn't an offshore. Well, obviously you can date Rolex watches based on their serial numbers. You can do that. You can also date any AP back to 1993 using a serial number. And the very first civilian Panerai watches came out in 1993. So if you've got the coin to go pre-Vendôme, that's a great year. I would also say it's a great year for IWC, as it was their Golden Jubilee, and the 5441, the Portuguese revival from that year, would be the watch to get if you want a birth year watch from 93 that is not just an offshore. But it sounds like you're going for an AP and you want something from 93. I would say go with the Star Wheel, a monstrously gorgeous watch and one of the all-time greats in the industry. Go with the Star Wheel, and go with an engraved, factory engraved Star Wheel. All right, guys, thank you so much. Remember, subscribe, check out Talking Time with Tim Mosso, my Facebook group, where I'm going to be doing 2 live chats next week, because this show will not be on the air due to the July 4th holiday. Time out, Tim out. Thanks to all our veterans who make the July 4th holiday a special one. Thanks to Sean, who makes the show possible, and thanks to you for the best job in the world. Time out, Tim out. Thanks for logging on.